Thank you, brother. So just to review a few things from the last class, if you weren't here, Brother Bob Owen discussed the candidates for the author of James. He discussed how James is a unique style of a book, and he distinguished between trials and temptations. In verse 13, speaks about how God is not the source of the temptation to do evil, but if you look at verse 12, he allows people to be tested so that they can prove their faith, so that there can be a good result, so that they can receive the crown of life. So let's pick up in verses 2 through 4. James 1, verse 2. It says, "Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." And so just to note a few things about these verses, notice in verse 2 it says the word when. It doesn't say if. So it's apparent that these trials are going to occur. But in the transition from verse 2 to 3, it's not that you're joyful at the trial itself, whatever it may be, that, oh, I'm so glad this happened, but you can be joyful at what the trial does, what it produces. As in verse 3 it says, the testing of your faith produces endurance. And so the trial leads to endurance. The endurance leads to the perfect result, where you'll lack in nothing, and then in verse 12 you'll receive the crown of life. The New Living Translation says it this way, verses 2 and 3. Listen to the difference of the translation. It says, "Dear brothers and sisters, when troubles of any kind come your way, consider it an opportunity for great joy. For you know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow." It uses the words opportunity and chance. And this kind of furthers the nuance there that you can respond to trials in two different ways. You can either draw closer to God, depend on Him more, or it can cause you to grow bitter, to resent God maybe. The saying goes, the same boiling water softens the potato and hardens the egg. Trials are just like that. The same trial can affect people in different ways. As I mentioned, they can become bitter towards God, or it can make them love God that much more and trust in Him that much more. And so a question that we must ask is, why do we have trials? As we've touched on, God allows trials and tests to occur so that faith can grow, so that endurance can be produced. Things such as natural disasters or disease or financial crises or even death could fall in this category of trials. And so I'll ask you now, what would be a reason that you would give to somebody for why trials occur? What would be a good reason that you could give somebody to why these things occur? Yeah, testing us to see what can be produced, how we can grow. Any other reasons?
It builds character.
Yeah, that goes with the growth and the endurance that we can become better through it.
Sometimes just that we're subject to circumstance like everybody else. Being a Christian does not make us immune to things that happen in life.
Yeah. Yep, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, John.
It also teaches us how much we are able to sustain with God's help. And I think, speaking personally, it's been something with the help of our youngest, going through those trials really showed us what we can go through and not just survive, but thrive.
Yeah. Causes you to trust in God that much more, to see His love and what He's done for us that much more. So, go ahead, Jacob.
I was going to say, it really puts into perspective that this world is not our home.
Yeah.
It helps us look forward to the next life that much more.
Yeah, I really appreciate that point, and we'll touch on that in a bit as well. So a reason I would give is that this world is an imperfect world, that it's a broken place, it's a sinful, evil place, that some people are putting too high expectations for this world. Back in Genesis 3, it describes how there's harmony between God and man. But then sin changed that. Sin changed a lot of things. And so God wasn't necessarily dwelling on this world anymore, and there are consequences that resulted from that sin. Specifically to Eve, it says there's going to be pain and childbearing. To Adam, there's going to be toiling work. That sin led to more drastic sins. In chapter 4, you have the first murder. Cain murders Abel. In chapter 6, we have the beginning of what happens during the flood, that the people were so evil continually. All their thoughts and intentions were evil. And also, you have the idea that death results from that as well. Genesis 5 is a genealogy, but at the end of that, every person is seen to be dying with the exception of Enoch. It says Adam died, Seth died, Enosh died, and it goes on and on. Did you have a comment back here? Okay. And so, once again, this is an imperfect world. Things will happen that won't seem fair, and that's a result of sin. But don't misunderstand me when I'm saying that. I'm not trying to be like Job's friends and saying that this thing that happened to you is a result of your sin. No, I'm just saying that it's a result of sin in general. The same thing happens in John 9. People are saying, is this man blind because of himself or his parents? And the answer is neither. It just happened. And it goes on to show more faith in God as well. And so, once again, we live in a sinful, broken world. And so that would be one reason I would give for why there are trials, why there are these things that occur to us. A second reason I would give is that trials are necessary for growth. And several of our comments went to that we can grow in character. We can grow in so many other ways. You may find this odd, but in my reading, when a giraffe is born, the mother does something very weird to it. It literally kicks it in the face or kicks it on the ground, and it goes flying away. And right when it gets up, instead of showing it the motherly love, it gets kicked down again. And this process is repeated over and over. And you may be thinking, what in the world is he talking about? But this process occurs where the giraffe learns how to quickly get up, how to just get up in general, and so many other things, so that when it grows up, if it's in danger, it can get up fast and avoid danger from lions or what other predators. So it may seem like a discipline or a tough process, but it's for the good of the giraffe, that it can survive, that it can live. And so trials can be similar to us. Maybe a more relevant example for us, if you follow hockey at all, my freshman year, the Lightning did super well. They were like the best team in the league. And then the playoffs came around, and they got swept. And the coach of the opposing team said, after that happened, the Lightning got even better. They went through that tough trial, if you want to call it that, of losing in an embarrassing fashion. They lost in the first round, didn't even win a game. And yet they've went on to win the next 2 championships, and they're in the 3rd Stanley Cup in a row this year. And so they went through something difficult, but it resulted in something good for them. And this idea, it's not any different for our spiritual walk, for our spiritual growth, because we must grow. And so we're going to endure difficult things, various things. And it's because we can't stay content with where we're at, but we have to grow. We can't stay still in our growth. Maybe another example is the idea of gold. To get the impurities out of gold, there's intense heat and a process that makes it pure. Turn over to 1 Peter. This kind of speaks to this example as well. 1 Peter 1 verse 6, sorry. And Peter here is discussing the ideas of suffering and of trials. And in verse 6, it says, "In this you greatly rejoice, even though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been distressed by various trials, so that the proof of your faith, being more precious than gold, which is perishable, even though tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. And though you have not seen him, you love him. And though you do not see him now, but believe in him, you greatly rejoice with joy inexpressible and full of glory, obtaining as the outcome of your faith the salvation of your souls." So it's very similar to what we've read in James, that trials lead to endurance, lead to the perfect result, and they lead to the crown of life. And it's no different for Peter as well. Trials make us stronger. Trials make us purer, in a sense. They should be drawing us closer to God. And not only are trials necessary for our personal growth, but sometimes witnessing trials that others are occurring help us grow as well. What are some biblical examples of people who were tested by God or allowed to endure something, endure a trial that we find they were very faithful? What would be some examples? Yeah, Job is one of the ones I had. Job went through a lot. God allowed him to go through a test, and we see his faith, and it's very encouraging to us that Job could trust in God so much. If he can trust in him that much, why can't we? And Job's mentioned in James as well. If you look at James 5, verse 11, Job is mentioned there. James 5:11 says, "We count those blessed who endure. You have heard of the endurance of Job and have seen the outcome of the Lord's dealings, that the Lord is full of compassion and is merciful." And so Job's endurance, in a sense, inspires us, motivates us to do better. And it shows that God is compassionate. God is merciful. He has love, when so many others didn't necessarily think so at that time. What would be some other examples you can think of? Yes?
Well, an example of a test of trial was with Abraham, when God asked him to offer up his son, the son of promise, to be sacrificed. And Abraham went through with what God told him to do. And we know the end of the story, that there was a ram in the bush. But Abraham, he was faithful through those trials.
Yeah, Abraham is another one I had, and we wouldn't know the great faith Abraham had without that test. We can see what occurred because of the test, that we look at Abraham as a father of faith. We might not think that if we didn't have that test, that story in which he proved to be so faithful. And once again, that faith shown by him helps us grow, helps us endure things. If Abraham could go through this, I can certainly go through whatever I'm going through right now. And so Abraham is also an excellent example. If you would turn over to Deuteronomy chapter 8, another example would be the Israelites. God tested them. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, look at verse 2. Deuteronomy chapter 8, beginning in verse 2, says, "You shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. He humbled you and let you be hungry, and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you understand that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by everything that proceeds out of the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, nor did your foot swell these 40 years. Thus you are to know in your heart that the Lord your God was disciplining you just as a man disciplines his son. Therefore you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, and to fear him. Skip down to verse 16. It says, in the wilderness he fed you manna, which your fathers did not know, that he might humble you, that he might test you, to do good for you in the end. At the moment that they were experiencing these tests, it may have been easy for them to question God. These are so difficult things for us to go through. Why are we having to go through it? But in this passage it says God did it for their good. Specifically with the bread, they would understand that they needed God to live, the Word of God to live. That it's not just this physical life, that it's not just the physical bread, but he did that so they would understand that lesson. And if you look at verse 4, God all alone, God the whole time was taking care of them. That he was delivering them, and yet they continued to forget about that. And so the Israelites are another example of a test that we have. That God was always there for them. He was with them. And they may have not just understood the test at the time, but it was for their good, so they could grow to appreciate God more, to draw closer to him, to trust in him that much more. You guys have any other examples of biblical figures that went through tests or trials?
I was thinking, some of these, these tests, they may not have permanent effects, but then there are tests that do. And I was thinking, for instance, of the church in Acts 8. They've experienced persecution. We know that's not from God. God did not want his saints to be killed, yet it's happening nonetheless. And yet what they take from that is, even though they have to scatter out of Jerusalem, they then go and they spread the gospel wherever they are. And I find that, as we continue to navigate changing circumstances, changing times, changing societal pressures, and yet here's an example of a church that faced very permanent, at least from the physical standpoint, obstacles and trials, and yet they took that and actually grew from that.
Yeah, while you mentioned that, I was thinking of Acts chapter 4 with the arresting of the people, and they're like, you need to stop talking. They're like, no, we're going to talk about God and what he's done. And what an encouragement that would have been for the church there, for other people, that although they were arrested, they're not going to be silenced. So, of course, everybody else who wasn't arrested, they can gain from that. They could grow in their courage to continue to speak about God and Christ. Turn over to 1 Peter 3. We'll look at another passage in 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3, we'll begin in verse 14. First Peter 3, verse 14. It reads, "But even if you should suffer for the sake of righteousness, you are blessed. And do not fear their intimidation, and do not be troubled, but sanctify Christ as Lord in your hearts, always being ready to make a defense to everyone who asks you, to give an account for the hope that is in you, yet with gentleness and reverence." When we suffer or experience a trial, people are going to kind of notice how we react. If we're responding to it, still being faithful in God, having our hope in God, that's going to be odd to some people. They're going to wonder, why aren't you complaining? Or why aren't you suffering that much more? Or telling others about that suffering. But if you're hopeful, faithful in God, that's going to cause them to ask about your hope, or at least question you about your hope. How can you be optimistic in this trial? How can you still have hope when this thing has occurred to you? How can you still trust in God? And that's just a perfect opportunity to tell them about God. Tell them about Christ, what all he has done for you, how he has delivered us, what all he has blessed us with, and so many other things along those lines. But in that trial, that's an opportunity to give glory to God, to praise Him, to tell them about the good news. And so people who endure trials, in a sense, can help others grow when they endure that trial. And a third reason I would give, as Jacob touched on, trials lead to a better perspective. Look at James 1 once again. Look at verse 16. James 1, verse 16. James 1, verse 16 says, "Do not be deceived, my beloved brethren. Every good thing given and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shifting shadow. In the exercise of His will, He brought us forth by the word of truth, so that we would be a kind of first fruits among His creatures." When somebody experiences a trial or sees somebody else experiencing a trial, they could try to blame it on God, as verse 13 kind of indicates that, oh, I'm being tempted by God, or this is brought about because of God. But verse 16 reminds us, don't be deceived. All the good things that we have, all the blessings, the perfect gifts we have, that's what's from God. He's always there with us, providing abundantly for us. All the good things are from Him. And then verse 18 goes on to say, "In the exercise of His will, He brought us forth by the word of truth," so that we would be a kind of first fruits among His creatures. We can be a first fruits among His creatures. He's going to take care of us. We're His possession. He's not trying to cause us to do evil or anything like that. But everything that He allows is for our growth, for our benefit, so that we can be better servants of Him. And so trials draw us closer to God. Trials also draw us closer to His people. I had two friends this year who experienced pretty terrible things, to be honest. One of them lost his mom. He's my age, so that's a very difficult thing for him to go through. Another one experienced his mom had cancer, and that was a very difficult thing. But both of them indicated to me that through those things, they were able to better see the love of God, because so many people reached out to them in love, with encouragement, to provide for them just words of love. So many other things that they said they could better see the love of God manifested in His people. That they didn't either appreciate or understand how much God's love is there in His people until that trial occurred. So people could look at a trial and grow bitter from it, or however they want to respond. But in this case, it drew them closer to God, and it drew them closer to His people, that they could better understand God's love. Another thing trials do for our better perspective is they simply remind us that we are not in control, but God is in control of everything. And another thing I'd mention about that is trials remind us not to fall in love with this world, but instead to look to God, to heaven, that we have a better place than here, as Jacob mentioned. There's this hymn called, "My God, I Thank You Who Have Made." I'll read verse 3 for you. It says, "I thank Thee too, that our joy is touched with pain, that shadows fall on brightest hours, that thorns remain, so that earth's bliss may be our guide and not our chain." Trials and difficult things that we go through, they're there, I believe, as a way to point us to heaven. That we remember this world isn't our home. That we have someplace better than here. That's perfect compared to here. That this world is not all there is. But it can draw us closer to God, as we've mentioned, closer to His people, and closer to His dwelling as well. That we'll have a better perspective. And so God has not left us alone. How would you respond? How does God help us in trials? How would you answer that question? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, He's right there with us, providing for our growth.
You mentioned already that He's given us all these examples of people who did endure because of their faith in God. And so if they endure these trials and they persevere, then we know this is not beyond us, that we can as well.
Yeah. Simply, we have God with us. We mentioned that He's in control of everything. And so He will make everything right. Kenny, do you have a comment?
I think the other thing, and it's the most important thing, because every single trial, there are people who fail Him, and He's given us a road back. And I think about the prodigal son. I think about so many people. I think about Jonah. And the thing about it is God did not come for perfect people. God came for broken people, and He only came for broken people. If you think you're going to go through and endure every trial, you are mistaken, and you will not see God, because God is only here for people who are broken.
Yeah, I like that you brought up Jonah. What a interesting character that is. Very broken, didn't want to see the love of God shown to other people, and yet God's love and patience is so manifested with the other characters in that story. And also you mentioned about He came for broken people. I think it's Mark 2:17 says He came not for the righteous, but He came to call the sinners, call the sick people to Him. That's who He's looking for. And,
To Kenny's point, even
yeah.
all the examples that we used of people who endured, Abraham didn't endure perfectly either.
Yeah.
Neither did Job. Job flat out questioned God and got called to task him. So they're not perfect.
Yeah.
I think another thing that we can draw from is our past experiences. We have gone through some trials in our lives growing up, and so those past experiences can let you know I made it through with His help this time. I know He's beside me, and He's going to help me through this time also.
Yeah, like, look where I was before, and He was with me. Now look where I am now, and He's still with me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
If our focus is on during our trials and endurance and patience and so forth that we show, if our focus is on the end result, the crown of life, I think focus on that should help us through all of it.
Yeah, everything pales in comparison. This seems difficult, but look what I can obtain to be with God. Look to that goal. Look to that future. Yeah, Mike?
Sometimes the trial is our final trial. Stephen went through a final trial, and the hope that was laid up for him in heaven is what, in effect, got him through that. And he was blessed to be able to see in heaven. But some remaining strong through that trial, there are many trials that we face through life, but sometimes it may be the final trial.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. That's very true, Stephen. Yeah, thank you, Mike. Jacob?
Another way I think that God helps us get through trials, I know, is through the support system or family that He set up through His church. And we see that, I think, played out in Acts 2, when it says that the believers were selling everything that they had and giving to others as there was need. And so, like, any need that we have, whether that be something small or a big trial that we're going through, whether it's physical, monetarily, or spiritually, or we just need somebody to be there for us. I know the family here has been a huge help to me. So.
Yeah, that makes me think of a passage in 1 John, if you guys want to turn there. 1 John 3:16 says, "We know love by this, that He laid down His life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for the brethren. But whoever has the world's goods and sees his brother in need and closes his heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? Little children, let us not love with word, with tongue, but in deed and in truth. Christ's love was manifested when he died for us. We know love by this. It wasn't that he just said that I love you, but it's manifested because he acted and died for us. Just as Jacob mentioned, when we pour ourselves out and do things for others, they can better see the love of God and understand it. It's not just words to them. And that's what verse 18 is indicating as well. Let us not love with word or with tongue. It's not saying, eliminate that, but deed and in truth. That's the more important thing. But certainly we should also love with word and tongue as well. Look back at James 1. So we mentioned that God is right there with us, that God understands, he cares, he wants us to grow. He's just disciplining us like a father. He's full of compassion and mercy. But look at verse 5, what he offers to us. But if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all generously and without reproach, and it will be given to him. But he must ask in faith, without any doubting. For the one who doubts is like the surf of the sea, driven and tossed by the wind. And so we can ask God for wisdom. We can ask God for comfort. We can ask him for so many different things. And often we might not do that because we're too focused on the trial itself, or maybe the immediate circumstances, instead of looking to the future hope that we have. And as we've discussed already, we have his people already. If you want to, turn over to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Look at verse 3. 2 Corinthians 1, verse 3. Blessed be the God and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our affliction, so that we will be able to comfort those who are in any affliction, with the comfort with which we ourselves are comforted by God. For just as the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance, so also our comfort is abundant through Christ. But if we are afflicted, it is for your comfort and salvation. Or if we are comforted, it is for your comfort, which is effective in the patient enduring of the same sufferings which we all suffer. And our hope for you is firmly grounded, knowing that as you are sharers of our sufferings, so also you are sharers of our comfort. For we do not want you to be unaware, brethren, of our affliction which came to us in Asia, that we were burdened excessively, beyond our strength, so that we despaired even of life. Indeed, we had the sentence of death within ourselves, so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God who raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a peril of death, and will deliver us. He on whom we have set our hope, and he will yet deliver us. You also joining and helping us through your prayers, so that thanks may be given by many persons on our behalf for the favor bestowed on us through the prayers of many. So there are many things evident here, many things that we've discussed, that we have this interconnectedness, this connection between Paul and the people he's writing to, that they can comfort one another in their afflictions, that God comforts them. They can remember the deliverance that he's provided for them time and time again to get through the things they're going through at this time. And verse 5, I think, sums it up so well, that the sufferings of Christ are ours in abundance. They may be abundant, they may be many, but it goes on to say, so also our comfort is abundant through Christ. The comfort is so much more in Christ, that we can trust in him, look to him, believe in him. As we mentioned in James 1:17, all the good things are from Christ. He's abundantly provided for us. And it goes on to say there's no variation or shifting shadow. He doesn't change. He continually offers that comfort, abundantly offers that comfort for all of us. And so we can get through these trials when we remember God's love, God's patience for us, His deliverance, and so many other aspects of God. Go back to James chapter 1. James chapter 1. And we'll end where we started. Verse 2. Consider it all joy, my brethren, when you encounter various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its perfect result, so you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. Verse 12. Blessed is a man who perseveres under trial. For once he has been approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love Him. And so trials produce endurance, which produces the perfect result, and then you can receive the crown of life. And so God allows these trials because it's a sinful world, because they're necessary for growth, and because we need a better perspective of this world. Are there any other closing comments about? Yeah, John.
Sure. Personal story. I just told my grandson a couple of days ago. Signed the first mortgage on our first house. I called my dad, who had lived through the Depression. And I knew my dad was going to have a plan. What do you do if something unexpected, out of your control, happens to you? He said, get your mind right. Don't jump out of a window. Commit suicide. So I think it's fair to look at this teaching and say, this is not teaching about trials. This is teaching about what we can do. How do we respond to the trial? Can you plan for a hurricane? Yeah, you can do some planning. And you can even now with technology get an idea that might be coming to your house. Should you leave? Should you get extra water? Some trials you can say, I can do things to get ready for that. But the trials we're talking about here, you can't be ready. You just have to endure. You have to get your mind right. You have to make the choices so that you don't give up and you don't abandon your faith.
Thank you, brother. With that, we'll be dismissed. Thank you.